Hello, everyone. Welcome to our August Caregiver Corner. My name is Emily Taylor. I'm the Vice President of Advocacy and Engagement for Solve ME, and I'm so excited to join once again Stephanie Harrison from The New Happy, a founder of The New Happy, who will be leading us in our Caregiver Corner session today. In her efforts to help cultivate better well-being, Stephanie will share her unique perspective as a caregiver fused with her expertise in applied positive psychology. Her interdisciplinary approach to studying happiness is based on hundreds of academic studies and her original research that informs the New Happy philosophy that true, lasting happiness comes from being of service to others. In this session, we'll be covering the science-backed tools that you can use to help stay resilient in these difficult times. And as always, we're excited to offer the live Q&A after this recorded presentation, so you're welcome to join us for that part. With that, I'll turn it over to Stephanie. Thank you so much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay, everyone? Good? Okay, I see a thumbs up. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here with all of you today. As Emily mentioned, I'm coming to this presentation from two different perspectives. One is being a caregiver for the past 5 years. And then the second is my background in positive psychology, which includes the study of resilience and how people can cultivate greater resilience, as well as other topics like well-being and happiness in their lives. And my personal experience of navigating being a caregiver and amidst all the other difficulties that that can entail has been that there's a lot of really interesting and useful tools that come from the study of psychology that we can apply in our daily lives. Before I get into the content, I just also want to recognize that all of you on the line probably could be teaching a class to many other people in resilience as well. The skills that are required to be a caregiver, particularly for illnesses such as these, are so incredibly comprehensive. They require so much from you. And I just want to acknowledge that everyone here is probably already in the top 1% of resilience in the world. And my hope is that the content that I'm going to share with you today will give you a few additional tools that you can draw upon, whether that's in difficult moments or when you need an extra boost, maybe things that provide you with another way of approaching it that you haven't necessarily seen in the past. But really, I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you. I hope that you'll share your questions, that you'll speak up and offer your perspectives on what has worked for you in the past and what hasn't. And I would love to help address any challenges or difficulties that you're having in order to support you. So with that being said, I'm going to hop into sharing my slides and we'll go through these. And again, please feel free to send me a chat at any point or to speak up. And Emily, if you see a chat pop up that you want me to address, just feel free to pop in as well. Sometimes the chat is a little difficult to see when you're doing a screen share.
Will do.
Thank you. All right. So in terms of resilience, when I think about the skills and the qualities that help people to be resilient, according to the extensive research that's been done, I've identified that there are these 5 key components, the 5 R's, that we can lean on to help us as we're navigating difficult times. And these are relationships, our responses, our reframes, our realizations, and our reason. I'm going to go through each of these in turn and talk a little bit about specific and practical tools that you can use for each of these. And before I do, there's one really important element of the research in resilience that I want to start, and that is that resilience can be cultivated. So I'm sure that you have seen in your lives that you have gotten stronger over time through navigating difficulties, through overcoming challenges, and through learning new ways of navigating your daily life. And this is what we see play out in the research. We can and do become more resilient. And of course, a lot of the time we don't really want to become more resilient because those things that make us resilient are challenging. They're difficult situations. They're experiences that are extraordinarily painful. And my hope is that what we're going to talk through today will help make those difficult experiences a little bit easier to navigate. But I also want you to know that as you practice these tools, you will become more and more equipped to keep using them naturally without having to consciously think about them. So again, it's really more like building a muscle than a certain designation that's been applied to somebody. I think in our culture, we talk about people who are resilient and we group them into this thing as though it's a quality that's been given to them from the beginning of their lives. But resilient people are not born, they are made. And this is something that we can tap into and something I personally have found very empowering on my own journey, that even when things have been very, very difficult, I know that I can learn from it and try and grow and improve the way that I'm addressing that in the future. So, starting with relationships, this is one of the key elements that is often a surprise when I talk to people about this, because we think of resilience as something that's confined to an individual self, right? Like this is a resilient person or this is not a resilient person, as I just mentioned. But in fact, our relationships are a profound source of our resilience. And when scientists look at people who are more resilient in the face of challenges, they tend to find that they are more equipped and more able to lean on the people in their lives to get the support when they need it. And one of the really difficult things that I have navigated in my caregiving experience is what I am sure might be familiar to many of you, which is that when you go through something really difficult, many of the people in your life don't tend to stick around in the way that you hope they will. And this is a really, really difficult experience because when you need people the most, it's often the time that they are not around. And I really personally struggled with this, with feeling like I wasn't getting the support that I had hoped for. And then I discovered a really interesting study that helped me to think a little bit differently about this. And it found that resilient people really just need one or two people who are close to them, who can be there to support them. You don't need to have a massive community, although if you do have one, that's wonderful. But having just a single person to confide in is one of the strongest protective factors against depression and one of the most important qualities that makes for resilient people. I know that personally, I used to spend a lot of time focusing on all of the people who I thought had sort of left us or abandoned us. And that led me feeling to greater loneliness, feeling more disempowered, and really struggling to even connect with the people who were still around. And when we think about our communities and the people who we can lean upon, having that one or two other people around us can be such an important asset because no one is supposed to be able to go through something like you're going through on your own. It's extraordinarily difficult enough, and you need other people that you can lean on. Other studies have found that when caregivers are unwilling to ask for help, it ends up backfiring and creating even more difficulty and even more stress in their lives. And I completely understand why we do this because I've witnessed it in myself. You feel like no one else understands the challenge that you're going through. No one else knows the exact protocol that you need to do in order to support the person you're caring for. Everyone else is going to mess it up or do something wrong or not be able to do it in the way that you need to. And particularly with patients that are very sick, helping to support them in the specific way is really incredibly important. But what has been very helpful for me and what the research shows is that asking for help in areas that are even outside of your caregiving responsibilities can make a profound difference. I know that we have all been socialized in many ways and have been forced to, in others, lean only on ourselves. But if there is one thing that I can give you as a takeaway from this presentation, it's that you are worthy of help too, and you are worthy of support as well. And that's one reason why I love the work that Solve does in terms of putting on these community gatherings and all of the other resources, because having this community around us can be such a powerful balm to help us in these difficult times, particularly when the people in your life might not really understand it. So having just that one or two other people in your life, I strongly recommend, if you can think about who those people might be and how you might lean on them just a little bit more. I often would tell myself, well, how can I ask for just 5% more support than what I'm asking for right now? And that helped me to sort of overcome the barrier and the fear of reaching out and asking for support. When you do this, you can also communicate to them what you need. I have found, and again, this is something I've noticed in the research, that people often don't know how to support us. They see you as somebody who is incredibly strong, who has it all together, who might not be even willing or interested in their help. And actually communicating very explicitly what you need to other people is one of the most important strategies that we can lean on for our own resilience. And this is, again, something that we were never taught how to do, and it can feel very uncomfortable and difficult. But when we're asking for what we need from somebody, it can be as direct as saying, I need you to check in with me every other day so that I know that I'm not alone, even though I'm isolated right now. Or I need you to offer to do this chore for me once a week so that I can get a little bit of a break. whatever it is, you can start with this script and really articulate, this is what I need from you. Are you able to do this? Or is there something else that you can help me with? Again, starting to articulate these needs in this way is not something that is separate from being resilient. It's an essential part of the process of being resilient, because you, me, none of us can satisfy our needs alone. We always have to draw upon and lean upon other people. Lastly, in terms of our relationships, the other key critical component here is learning how to talk about our emotions and our feelings. Once again, when we talk about resilience, the idea of emotions feels very separate from it for some reason. We think of resilience as this very stoic thing where resilient people are strong and they never show any weakness and they never feel any pain and they never talk about what they're going through. And in fact, the opposite is true. Research has found that the more resilient you are, the more likely you are to speak about your emotions, to allow yourself to experience them, and to honor whatever is happening within you. It's actually suppressing our emotions that ends up backfiring on us, which I'll get to in a few slides. But speaking and expressing what you are going through will help you to be able to navigate the challenges in your life. And again, this is why it's so important, why to have that person, that those few people around you, a small community, a big community, whatever it is that you have, in order to be able to express whatever it is that you need, what is going on inside of you, so that you can be able to continue caring for the person in your life as well as yourself at the same time. Emotions are an essential part of resilience. They're not something that gets pushed to the side. In order to really navigate these challenges, we do have to give ourselves the space to discuss and talk about what we're going through. I want to pause and see if anyone has any questions about relationships, things that you'd like to discuss, any tips that you've experienced that might be helpful for the rest of the community. Any other comments to hear? I'll give anyone a second if you want to come off mute and share. Okay, feel free to pop them in the chat at any point or save it to the end.
I wanted to give the opportunity for folks to jump in from the community, but I did want to share that that really resonated with me personally in my caregiving journey, and it was really interesting that one of the things, the conversations we had with my family is how we talk about these things, and we even had to make space to even talk about how we talk about the things we feel about, and are we expressing them in a way that's not those you-centered statements that's like, it's your fault, it's you made me feel it, and I'm feeling this, as opposed to directing it at any one person. That was a huge coming together for my family. So I just wanted to add that, because that was a experience that I shared with this process that you had, and it was a family experience that brought us closer together. So thank you again. I think that's really important, those elements of being a caregiver, to have the space to talk about your feelings.
That's so meaningful, Emily. Thank you for sharing. That reminds me of something else that I went through with my partner, which was navigating how hard it is to talk about how their illness might be affecting you without it coming across as any sort of blame or shame or anything negative like that. So creating the space for that can be extraordinarily difficult. I know that it was in my experience. And because we've been isolated due to COVID, like we often were mostly leaning on each other in a lot of these times. And I think that to your point, Emily, like the best practice here is to articulate your emotions using the language of how you are feeling and how it affects your needs. And so for anyone who hasn't come across it before, one of the most helpful books I've ever read about emotions and communicating in relationships is called Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. And he teaches this framework he's developed to help you to express your emotions in a way that's grounded in what you need, and not, Emily, as you said, like about blaming the other person or about directing it onto them as somebody causing your feelings. And it's a very simple framework that actually also really helps you to get in touch with yourself and to get in touch with others at the same time. And what you're describing seems like a perfect reflection of that. So I would highly recommend that book if anyone else wants to dig a little bit deeper. And also we could always do another session where I walk through some of the tactics that he shares there, if that would be helpful.
What was the name of that book one more time?
Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. It's been around for, I think, about 30 or 40 years, and it's an incredible resource. Nothing has been more helpful from my perspective.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a question in the chat? Sorry, I'm not able to open. Wait, maybe I am. Let's see. Okay, I'm able to get into the chat now. Fantastic. Okay. And yes, of course, obviously being in therapy, that's an amazing way to be able to get in touch with your emotions and to simply like learning how to even notice them and to label them and understand them. If we want to talk about them, having that understanding is the precursor to that. All right, let's move into the next section here. So in terms of what we can do when we're responding to the events of our lives, sometimes it can be really helpful to think about what is happening and how we want to address it in a meaningful way. And there are a lot of predictable, difficult events that happen in a caregiver's life, right? I know from my experience that my days often involved, very difficult emotions, very difficult moments, very complex considerations about well-being for myself and others, a constant risk calculus, and learning how to view these moments as specific events that I could respond to in ways that either served me or perhaps didn't, and then trying to lean as much on the serving side as I possibly could without holding myself to a superhuman standard was an incredibly helpful strategy that, again, is something that's reflected in what we know from the scientific literature about how we respond to things. And the reason why is pretty simple, because we have the capacity to essentially cognitively rewire our brains and make specific responses more of a default. And through the patterns and the repetition of these practices, we make them from going as a conscious response where we have to really work at it and it's really difficult and very mentally taxing and draining for us, to becoming something where we can do that in a meaningful way without really thinking about it. And so every time that we choose to respond to an event in our lives, generally with compassion for ourselves and for others, that is the best possible way that we can engage with that event. And if there's one pillar I would encourage you to lean upon, is this idea of compassion, because it's something that you can offer to yourself and it's something that you can also offer to the people in your life. And compassion doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do something differently for somebody else. It just means that you're willing to acknowledge the pain that the other person is in, or willing to acknowledge that pain in yourself. And specifically, this is really important when we are working with our own emotions and the pain that comes up inside of us. When we are treating our inner pain as something that is shameful or wrong, or something that indicates that there's a problem with us, something that we're lacking, we often end up creating these outsized effects in our lives. They can turn very quickly into things like anger and resentment, frustration. We might even take it out on the people in our lives, even though we don't really want to. That's why learning to acknowledge our pain in one way or another is such a powerful practice. And so, what does this actually look like? How do we acknowledge our pain? I honestly think that one of the most powerful and simple ways is to think about yourself like how you would respond to a friend. And I will often speak out loud to myself and say something like, hey, this is really hard. This is really painful. I know that you're having a really difficult time with this. Because those are the words that I would say to a friend who is going through something hard. And by offering that kindness to myself, I am able to then take that sadness or that pain and sit with it and be present with it. And ideally, that ends up not sort of manifesting in external consequences that end up backfiring and not serving my family and my needs at the end of the road. So when you are feeling inner pain, simply taking a moment, you can put your hand on your heart, you can give yourself a hug that actually releases oxytocin, which is the hormone that really helps you to recover and to bond with other people. You will be able to treat this pain with the compassion that you deserve. And the other bit about this that's so important is, depending on your relationship with the person who you're caring for, you might feel like you are in need of love as well, right? You are in a role that is asking for you to express a great deal of love to another person, and that takes many different forms. And of course, there will be moments in your life when you are also yearning to receive love, and perhaps that other person might not be able to give it to you. And learning to give yourself that love that you're looking for can help you in those moments, particularly if you don't have somebody in your life who you can lean upon at that specific moment. Similarly, I have spoken to a lot of people who talk about how they just want the difficult part of their experience to be over. They want to get over it. They want to pretend it wasn't a problem. And they just want to be essentially healed from whatever challenge that they're facing or going through. And unfortunately, there is no way to take a shortcut on this. We actually have to acknowledge the pain that we went through so that we can move on from it. And again, when you are in a situation like so many of you on this call are, there is a great deal of pain that comes up on a daily or weekly basis that has to be addressed and managed. And I don't want this to sound like an extraordinary burden on you. It's something that we can do on a moment by moment basis as we notice that pain coming up. So what I want to encourage everyone to do is to get into the habit of constantly offering yourself this love and care when you are in pain, because then it's not something that builds up and accumulates over time into those forms of resentment that I discussed, but it's something that you can continually accept the difficult situation that you're going through and then discover how you would like to move forward from it. This constant practice of meeting yourself where you are with love will help you to continue cultivating the resilience that you need. As I mentioned, there's another really important part about this with your emotions, and it's about whether or not we face them or avoid them. And when we avoid our feelings or our challenges or the difficulties in our lives, the rule of thumb is that they only get bigger. And this is very difficult and a really painful lesson, at least for me, to navigate in my life. The idea that I could outrun my feelings about my challenges, or that if I just ignored them for long enough and suppressed them, they would eventually go away, proved to not be true. And this is, again, why therapy and other resources like that can be so helpful, because you have the chance to actually start to unpack what has been suppressed within you or what you've been avoiding. When you face the thing, face the emotion, face the task, or face the pain that you are dealing with in your life, you ultimately, yes, it's harder, it's bigger in the moment, but at the end, it quickly fades away. Whereas when we avoid it, it only builds up more and more. So the next time that you find yourself avoiding what you're going through, avoiding a pain in your life, avoiding something that is weighing upon you, I hope that you will remember this image and remind yourself that facing it in the moment is going to be, in the long run, something that does help you, because it will shift you from a reaction to being able to respond to it. This is not very easy. I recognize that. And it's something that, again, takes a lot of practice and a lot of care. But as you do, you will be starting to build that muscle of continually saying, I can face this, I can navigate this emotion, even if it's very, very overwhelming for me right now. Similarly, thoughts are related to our emotions. They are typically what actually drive our emotions. So one of the core lessons from that book I mentioned, Nonviolent Communication, is that we can't control our feelings. And so we try to control our thoughts. And that is how we end up engaging in a lot of emotional suppression, because we're trying to control what we're thinking about, trying to force ourselves to think differently. And a lot of the time, what we need is not actually to force ourselves to choose new thoughts. We certainly don't need to force ourselves to think positively or anything like that. But what we do need to do is just take a step back from those thoughts and to be able to witness them. So instead of having them be overwhelming things that are kind of feel like they might be controlling our lives in some way, or feeling like we have to control them back in order to overcome that, we can take a step back and actually observe them. And so one of the practices here that is really helpful is engaging in mindfulness or meditation practices. And there have been a fair deal of studies that have found that this can be very helpful for resilience. And it's not because it's going to, in my opinion, it's not really about any sort of inner peace that you feel. It's not about enlightenment. It's about the fact that when you practice mindfulness, what you're doing is you're distancing who you are from the thoughts that you're having. And you're able to separate those two things. So it gives you a distance form of attention where you can look at those thoughts. And from there, you can actually analyze, are these helping me? Or are there other ways that I'd like to think about this, other opportunities to consider what I might be missing? And it's that perspective that allows us to shift and to choose new perspectives to think about. So in order to do this, I simply never have time to meditate, and I'm sure that most of you don't either. What I like to do is instead to just practice mindfulness as I go about my life. So what I'll do is commit to saying, okay, while I'm doing the dishes or tidying the kitchen or something like that, I am just going to simply focus on my breathing and try and witness the thoughts that I'm having. And I actually imagine, as you can see on the screen here, this taking a step back mentally from the big overwhelming thoughts to them being smaller and at a distance where I can look at them, where I'm the one who's viewing them. And this is a form of mindfulness that is completely valid. You don't have to sit on a cushion and do a traditional meditation to experience the benefits. And the reason I like this so much as a tool for us caregivers is that it's something that we can integrate into our lives in a meaningful way without having to add another to-do list. So the more that you start to practice this, the more this will help you to be able to look at those thoughts and then to take a step back from them to understand how you would like to move forward with them. And we'll talk a little bit about reframing and what that means shortly. And then finally, the last tool I have for responding is about how we respond to the setbacks in our day. And before I became a caregiver, I was very, very, sheltered in terms of the setbacks in my life. And it was, kind of if I had a bad meeting at work or something like that, it could ruin my whole day. And I look back on that time and think of, how sort of naive I was and how low my tolerance for difficult situations and stressors was. And over the last few years, as I have navigated life, as I'm sure all of you had, with multiple setbacks in every day that you don't have any sort of luxury of allowing it to ruin your day, I have tried to figure out what a better way is to respond to that, where I feel like I can bounce back and recover because I have to. And it's important to me that I find a way to navigate that. And in digging through the research, I was pretty surprised to discover that the reason that we don't bounce back from these setbacks is because we don't let ourselves feel our feelings. So it really comes back to this principle of allowing ourselves to feel whatever it is we're feeling. Because in this case, when something hard happens, when you have a setback, you have the emotions inside of you, but oftentimes we try to just push through them. We suppress them, we push them down, we pretend it wasn't a big deal, or we essentially zoom past it onto the next task. And those emotions are still in there, and they are going to need to be expressed in one way or another. What happens is that they cling to us for the rest of the day, and they sort of cast that dark shadow or a cloud upon everything else that we're doing. Even though it might have been just 1 minute in, the 1,400 minutes that you have in your day, it ends up being a minute that affects so much of the rest of your day. And the key here is instead to actually let yourself pause and feel the emotion. And if you can't pause, let yourself feel it as you keep acting. So this is something as simple as saying, wow, I'm feeling really angry that this happened. And just saying that out loud to yourself, labeling your emotions is bang for your buck, probably one of the best tools that exists out there, because what it does is it helps you to calm down your amygdala, the part of your brain that characterizes your fight or flight mode, and tap into your prefrontal cortex, which is the wiser, more evolved part of your brain. So again, this is exactly what I just talked about. It helps to give you that distance from the emotion. So the paradox here is that we think that in suppressing our feelings, we'll be able to be more resilient. And in reality, allowing ourselves to feel those feelings, labeling them, and taking a step back from them is actually what does support us. So the next time that you do experience a setback in your day, something that goes wrong, something that makes you upset or uncomfortable, you can pause, acknowledge whatever it is that you're feeling, label it if you can. So just simply honoring the emotion by saying, I am sad, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, this feels really difficult right now, any sort of positive self-talk that supports you there, and then giving yourself the space to be able to bounce back. All right. I want to pause again. Any questions, comments, other strategies that you have found helpful for responding? Okay, I don't think there's any. If there are, feel free to add it to the chat. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how we can engage with these situations in our lives where we might need to reframe or to navigate those. So here's a model that I find really helpful for navigating difficult situations. When you have a problem, there are two different lenses that you need to try on here. And again, this is why that mindfulness practice can be so helpful, because it does help you to shift your perspectives mentally. So the first is to zoom in on the problem. And that means to actually give yourself a chance to investigate the details, to navigate the right way to do it, to figure out your plan of action, how you're going to support the person in your life, how you're going to support yourself, thinking really deeply and critically about all those different components. And this is where we want to use our rational, critical thinking brains that are probably there's a lot of very accomplished people in here who know how to do this stuff. The second part is probably more difficult. It's zooming out to keep a perspective. And I know that when there are challenges in our daily lives, they can threaten to overtake every part of our lives, to feel like they are the entire universe, and that there's nothing else for you, there's nothing else for you to do. It is all consuming. But when we take a step back and zoom out and we look at that problem through a lens of 30,000 feet in the air, we can see that there are other things going on in our lives. There are other relationships. There are other opportunities. There are other hopes. There are other possibilities that exist out there. And this can help us to take perspective. Research has found that having this greater perspective, I like to call it the 30,000-foot view, because it's nice to have a mental image of, being on a plane and looking down and seeing things from a greater distance. But you can think about it as a distance perspective or a mental shift, anything that helps you to connect with it. But as you do this, it helps you to remember and to put that challenge into perspective. And this is certainly, again, one of those skills that isn't easy at first, especially when it does really feel like that problem is all consuming in our lives. But taking that step back can be so helpful. And one thing that's really great here is the practice of journaling, whether you do that traditionally through writing. I have found it to be really helpful to use the voice notes function on my phone and to actually speak out loud to myself in the same way that I would if I was journaling. And I will put headphones on and I'll record it, and just allowing myself to essentially like vent or express myself, talk myself through it. That practice can help you to, again, take a little bit of distance. And the reason I personally like using the audio one is, again, because it's something you can do while you're doing chores or running errands or whatever it is. You don't have to set aside new time to do something else in a day that can feel completely full already. So this shift of your perspective, zoom in to solve it, but then also zoom out to keep perspective, is something that we can lean upon to help us to redraw upon our strength of resilience. Because the truth is that when we are so immersed in our problems and the difficult situations that we're facing, it does feel really hard to tackle them. It can feel like we don't have anything else to draw upon. A lot of this comes back to the challenge of being a caregiver and not having the systemic support that we need, the resources that would make this easier. But we have to find a way to draw upon these broader resources in order to help replenish us and to rejuvenate us. Another shift that I think is really helpful is, instead of expecting the day to be smooth, expecting the day to be bumpy. And this one probably took me, 4 years to figure out. I think that every day I continued to wake up and think, okay, today is going to be a day where I get everything under control. I get everything on my to-do list done. I find a way to exercise some control over my life and my day, and I figure it all out. And every day I would be completely disappointed, because by 10 a.m., all of that would have fallen apart. And so eventually I just gave up and I said, okay, I'm not going to expect that anymore. I'm going to expect that today will be chaotic and hard and difficult. And if there are moments of peace and joy and calm in my day, they will be a glorious, beautiful surprise. And something about shifting my expectations and really recognizing that the reality of life in any situation is that it's going to be bumpy, but the reality in our lives is that we can pretty much assume that that will be the case for most of us, is really helpful. And I don't think that this is about lowering your expectations or expecting worst case scenarios, but it's simply about treating yourself kindly and recognizing that, yes, this is your life and there are challenges that go along with that. And just because your day is bumpy doesn't mean it's bad or that there's something wrong with you or that you're not doing your role correctly in any way. It's just the nature of things. And when we allow life to be what it is, this level of acceptance ends up paradoxically allowing us to respond to those challenges with more grace and with more clarity. And so the way that you can put this into practice is simply in the morning, if you have a moment to yourself or as you're getting up and starting to navigate your day, really saying it out loud, saying that you will embrace bumpy days, you will embrace whatever comes, you accept the realities of the day to day. And it will help you hopefully to alleviate any sort of internal pressure that you might not even be aware that you're putting upon yourself. As we do this, we're allowing ourselves to give the space to respond to those challenges in a more meaningful way without constantly comparing them to the standard of, oh, this was how it's supposed to be, or this is how I should be doing things. Any form of using the word should is always going to be something that ends up backfiring and hurting our resilience because there is no should here. It's just us meeting the moment where we can with the resources that we have available. That's really what resilience is all about. The other perspective that can be very helpful here is considering the story and the way that you are describing it. So, for example, what a lot of people in studies, from what a lot of studies have found, a lot of people who are more resilient choose to tell themselves very different stories than people who are not. So, for example, when researchers look at combat veterans and what they have been through, they find that the more resilient ones, the ones who recover from PTSD, the ones who avoid getting it in the first place, or go on to experience what's called post-traumatic growth, where they actually transform after they've been through a difficult experience. What they tend to do is they tend to look for the sources of meaning in their life. They tend to reflect upon what they have learned. They tend to try and seek out a greater purpose, a reason why they're doing what they're doing through or what they're going through, what they're going through. They focus more on the small daily achievements rather than the bigger picture. And these things help them to become more and more resilient. There's a very useful exercise that can help with this. This does take a little bit of time, but only for a period of 4 days. And it's very, very effective. Would highly recommend it, especially if this is something that you would like to work a little bit on. What you do is you set aside 15 minutes and you free write anything that's going through your mind about the hard experiences that you've been through. Free writing just means that you don't judge yourself, you don't censor yourself, you know that any mistakes or typos or scribbles or swear words, whatever it is, it's all totally fine. You never have to show it to anyone. You do this for 4 days in a row, and multiple studies have found that this intervention actually has a profound impact on overall well-being as well as resilience. The reason is that we have suppressed a lot of our pain about difficult experiences, and until we actually unleash it, it can be really hard to write a new story. So if you do this, you can also just do it once if 4 days is not tenable. Simply give yourself the space to put everything on the paper. You can destroy it right away afterwards, but everything that you're feeling, completely uncensored. And as you do that, what you're opening the space for is the chance to then be able to look back at what you've been through, at your experiences, and decide if there is another story that you would like to tell. Because there's always different ways of looking at our situations in life. But when we are overwhelmed in our pain, it's very difficult to be able to see that. And also, there's probably a lot of even greater pain associated with having to do that, with having to go through this process, when so often what we're navigating is a profound amount of grief. So if you would like to work on crafting a story that helps you to feel stronger and more empowered and like you have more control over your life, start with this exercise. And then you can start to open up to what those possibilities might be for a new story that does serve you. And then lastly, the final perspective that I have really leaned on in my own life has been the Buddhist concept of impermanence, the recognition that no matter how difficult it is right now in this moment, it won't always be like this. And the holding on to this idea of, which is essentially encapsulated in the phrase that, this too shall pass, is one of those things that can be an anchor, especially in the most difficult of times, because what we tend to do is think about, the future and how difficult it might be if things stay the same. And we make these assumptions that life will be the same in the future. We act, even though we know that it's impossible, we act as though we know what's going to happen. And this is actually a very well-established cognitive bias where we take our present experience and we project it out. And one of the core factors that contributes to depression is a belief that this future will be the same as the present. And this belief that we are essentially trapped in the state of difficult emotional experiences and of suffering. And holding on to this idea of impermanence, ironically, can be something that helps you to remember that, yes, this is a really, really hard moment right now. And at a certain point, it won't be like this anymore. There are beautiful possibilities in the future. There are opportunities for hope. There are reasons that things may change. And our job is not to, do anything really other than to navigate to that moment when things do change. And holding on to this phrase, this too shall pass, isn't something that I have adopted personally as a sort of mantra, and often will say to myself as I'm going through my day and trying to draw upon new reserves of resilience. And it's something that I might encourage all of you to try if this is something you would like to do as well. I'll do another quick pause for any questions, but I know we want to save some time at the end, so feel free to pop those in the chat. And I'll just keep going through here. In terms of recognizing, I want all of you to really recognize just how amazing you are, the strength that you have, the capacity that you have built, the resilience that you've already demonstrated, as I mentioned. You have navigated so many complex situations. You have learned to create paths through so many difficult situations, things that would be very, very hard for anyone else in your life to ever go through. And to draw a sense of pride for that, to draw upon that as a source of strength, because pride is something that we have a really kind of strange definition of. We think that pride is something where, it's about how much better we are than other people or about our external accomplishments in the world. But real pride, according to the research, is about being better than your former self, having grown from who you used to be in the past. And there's a really helpful tool that can ground you in this and remind you of how far you'd come. And it's to think back about your prior self, whether you go back a year or 5 years or 10 years, and think about how they would be responding to this challenge that you're in if you teleported them forward. And you can start to see, wow, look at all the skills I've developed. Look at how much I've grown. Look at everything that I have learned. And yes, it's been difficult. Yes, it's been hard. Now I have the tools to help myself work through those emotions in a meaningful way. But I can also acknowledge that I have come so far and that there is a very important reason for me to be proud of myself. I know in a caregiving life, there are few and far between opportunities to feel good about yourself and to feel like you are getting the gratification of moving forward in a meaningful way. That is a huge contributor to overall well-being. And so we have to create those moments for ourselves. We have to be able to look at our lives and think, wow, I have made so many improvements in how I navigate these situations. It can even be helpful to jot down your progress on a piece of paper so that you can look at it. Marking down the things that you do differently, like, wow, I was so much calmer when I responded to the person that I am a carer for today. That's really great. I have been working really hard on that. And look at how I've done that. Or even the example Emily shared, look at how all of us are sharing our emotions in a different way and how wonderful that is that we have come so far. These milestones matter, and they are a source of pride that can give you the energy to continue moving forward in your life in a meaningful way. As you're doing this, I again just really want to emphasize that while there are problems in your life, there are difficulties, and there are challenges. They do not define you. They do not comprise the whole of who you are. There is a lot of research on caregivers and how we tend to establish being a caregiver as our primary identity, as the thing that defines ourselves. And the obvious reason is because it's a very all-encompassing role, and it's very important and very meaningful a lot of the time. So those two factors end up making it feel like it can be who you fully are. But you are a full person who has so many other things in your life, so many other attributes and qualities, so many other experiences that you've navigated in the past. And this challenge in your life, these situations that you're going through, any problem that you have to solve when you hang up the phone today, those things do not define you. They are just one part of your current experience. And again, taking that step back is one of the most helpful ways that we can see that there's so much that you can recognize and celebrate in who you are as a person, because that is your source of strength in many ways, in many moments. You have come so far. You have so much to offer. You are continually offering all of that. And the more that you can recognize and celebrate yourself for that, the stronger that can become. The other key element here is thinking about your own journey and how you talk about it. And I know from my own experience that one thing that was really difficult was feeling as though no one had really witnessed what my caregiving journey was like and all of the complexities and challenges that it involved. They simply saw, the old me and then the new me, and not having a companion who was there to witness it along the way, or not having the support from other people, felt in many cases to feel almost demoralizing in many ways. And what I learned was that in order to recognize how far I had come, I had to take the time to honor the journey that I had gone on. You're probably noticing a theme here where I really want to emphasize to you that a lot of this is about recognizing and honoring whatever is going on with you internally. So as you are celebrating yourself and how far you have come, as you are recognizing that you are a person who is not defined by your role, take the time to actually also honor the journey that you've been on. This is something that can happen in a number of different ways, but one that can be very helpful is to think about the key milestones that you've been through and what you have learned. So I have a list that I wrote on my phone, and I add things to it every so often of the key things that I have learned on this journey. They might be things about me as a person, or about my partner, or about life, or the world, or about how I navigate a situation. But I have this really long list now. And when I'm feeling low on energy, low on resilience, I'll go back and look at that. And basically what this is a wins list, but it's a different type of wins list because it's about you and how you have changed, how you have grown, what you have overcome, and the things that you have gained along the way. So much of this journey feels like it's about what you have given away, right? And what you have lost. And that is a profound part of grief that we, of course, need to honor. But I also find it's very helpful to recognize what you have given, what you have gotten. And those things might be internal qualities or attributes. They might be perspectives. They might be moments of love and compassion. And they matter. They're important. And you deserve to celebrate those as well. When you do that, you are, again, contributing to your inner stores of resilience and helping yourself to be able to respond in a different way in the next moment. All right, the last one here is reason. So this is thinking about our greater purpose. Having a greater purpose is one of the most important factors for resilience. Researchers have found that people can do extraordinary things and navigate extraordinary difficulties when they are doing it for other people, when they have something greater, a greater why that they are working towards. And I know for so many of us, we strive and we seek and we have this need to leave the world better off than it was before, to make an impact upon the world. And what I want to let all of you know is that you are already doing this. You are adding your bit of good to the world. Being there for another person is the most profound and sacred form of purpose that exists in the world, particularly when they are navigating illnesses that have left them, where the government and the world has left them behind in so many ways. your acts of service here are contributing and making the world better. Finding this greater why is not as easy in this situation as it can be, for example, if you're working for a purpose in work or things like that. But what you can do is focus on how you are contributing to the livelihood and the well-being of this person and the goodness that they get to experience in their lives. Every time that you are showing up for them and caring for them, you are making the world a better place. And this is how we actually do end up adding up to contribute to a better world. I was delighted when I discovered through the research that the key factor for a more peaceful world is actually more loving interactions between individual people. So anytime that you feel like what you do maybe is not important, or that you feel frustrated that you're not able to do something else, I want you to remember that your acts of service are making a huge difference in this world. And relatedly, I also think that shifting the way that we think about our legacy is a really powerful way to unlock our sense of resilience. The legacy that we leave, no matter who we are, no matter our life situation, is the love that we offer to others. And the role of a caregiver is in offering this love in order to help support another human being. Your legacy of what you are contributing to other people is, again, a key focus that can help you to marshal your resilience when you need it in difficult times, and to remember that what you are doing matters so very much.